Okay, so before we get started and we get super holy, is it okay if I throw a couple of my friends under the bus in front of all of you real quick? Is that okay? Just spilling the tea out in front of a bunch of kids. What could go wrong? Um, so I have a couple of friends who decided to plant this garden together. Miss Kara, who you guys know, Miss Beth, who you guys also know, and then Miss Melissa. I'm sure that a lot of you guys know her, but she's Ava's mom. So Ava, I'm throwing your mom under the bus. I'm very sorry. It's okay. If I was that sorry, I wouldn't do it, but I'm not that sorry. So they planted this garden together, and Melissa was talking to me about it one day, and she was like, I'm thinking about going today, but I don't want to go by myself. And I was like, well, I'll go with you. She said, okay, well, we'll meet here. And we met her at the garden. And you see, the mistake that I made was when she said garden, I thought she meant garden. I didn't think that she meant football field. This garden is the size of this entire center row of chairs. Like this whole section, that is this garden. That's not a garden, that's a farm, so everybody jot that down. If it's bigger than 2 by 2, that's not a garden. But you guys know, has your friends ever gotten you involved in something that you're like, this isn't what you told me it would be when I signed up for this? Yeah. I know I've heard some of Tyler's stories. I've heard some of y'all's stories too, but I won't throw you under the bus. But anyway, so we show up to this garden, and I was like, this isn't what you told me it would be. And she was like, I know. So I got signed up for that, but it's been super fun. I'm just kidding about throwing people under the bus. So I've been going the last several weeks and just helping out because I think it's fun. It's like hashtag homestead life, that stuff's coming back apparently. I love the whole homemade sourdough bread vibe because the apocalypse is coming. But it was just a joke for legal reasons. But I've been going and helping because I think it's fun. So we were in the garden a couple weeks ago pulling weeds, which if you don't know a ton about gardening, that's okay because me neither. But pulling weeds is the least fun part of the garden. Let me tell you why. You're down there and you're sweating in your knee pits, first of all. It's just running all over you because it was that day about a couple weeks ago where it was the hottest day of the year so far. It was like 170 degrees outside or something. It probably wasn't, but it definitely was. So I'm out there, sweat's pouring off of my forehead, down into my knee pits. It's beautiful. I smell great. And I'm like getting down and up and down and up, trying to yank weeds out of the ground. Some of them are this big, some of them are this big. Some of them have root systems bigger than Tyler's head. And I know because I yanked them out for a size comparison, like I held them in my hand. It was weird. And I'm sitting there and I'm pulling weeds, and that's the least fun part because you don't actually go home with anything. You're just sitting there sweating for nothing. It's great. Everybody should do it. All of you should come join. But as I'm sitting there yanking weeds up out of the garden, I was thinking to myself, this is how God can see all of us. Like if I'm a plant and if Amber is a plant, then I can see her growing and she can see me growing. But we can't actually see the roots that we're putting down. All these weeds with roots bigger than my head, God can see those things before I ever yank them up out of the ground, but I can't. So if there are weeds attached to the plant that's Amber's life, and if there are weeds attached to my life, God can see those things, but I can't actually see those things until I yank them up out of the ground. So as I was sitting there pulling weeds and being mad about it, there were some of them I could just pluck up out of the ground, and some of them I pulled and I pulled and I pulled, and I still couldn't get them up. And it made me think, if somebody tried to uproot my faith like this, if this is the enemy in my life trying to uproot my faith and pulling and pulling and pulling, how hard would he have to pull? How hard would it be to uproot my faith? And that's what I want us to wrestle with tonight. Not only what does it mean to have a rooted faith, but how strong are your roots? Because the devil is going to come and try to yank and yank and yank that faith up out of your life. But how hard is it going to be? So, and that's where we get to Psalm 1. So I know we've already read it, but let's read it again because reading the Bible never gets old, right? That's where you say yes. I'm just messing with you. So Psalm 1, let's read through this again, but through the lens of what it means to have a rooted faith. Oh, the joys of those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, or stand around with sinners, or join in with mockers. But they delight in the law of the Lord, meditating on it day and night. They are like trees planted along the riverbank, bearing fruit each season. Their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do. So let's camp out here for just a second. We're seeing characteristics of what it looks like to have a rooted faith, right? People with a rooted faith don't stand around with people who are gossiping. They don't stand around with people who are making fun of some other students at school. They don't do that stuff. When there's a voice in the back of their head that's telling them maybe you should smart off to your mom. Maybe you should just backhand your little brother because after all, who's going to know it was you, right? Cadence, go home and try again. I'm just kidding. Please stay. But like when those things are happening, they don't give in to that stuff because they're planted, right? They are well rooted. So let's keep reading. Verse 4 says, but not the wicked. They are like worthless chaff scattered by the wind. So chaff's kind of a weird word for us to be reading, but the person who wrote this psalm, King David, was actually writing it in a society where they would have understood what this meant because it was an agricultural society, meaning that their economy was based on farming. So when they say chaff, the people who are reading that are like, oh, I know what that means, but we don't necessarily. So the chaff, when the wheat grows out of the ground, right, this is stuff that we make bread from, when it blows around in the wind, because it's grown in a lot of windy places, there are parts of it that just blow away because they have no roots, they're not super heavy, but they just kind of blow off the top. So that's what he's talking about, right? It's the part that you don't need anyway. This is what he's talking about with people who don't have a rooted faith or people who are not believers. They are like chaff scattered by the wind. They will be condemned at the time of judgment. Sinners will have no place among the godly. For the Lord watches over the path of the godly, but the path of the wicked leads to destruction. So we've seen a little bit about what it looks like to have a rooted faith and what happens when you don't have a rooted faith. So as I was reading and studying for this and trying to help just break down what a rooted faith even is, because that's a cool thing to have, right? It sounds like, but we don't actually tangibly know what that looks like. I found 3 things that we can learn and that we can put into practice about what it means to have a rooted faith. So the first thing I learned is that a rooted faith is intentionally planted. A rooted faith is intentionally planted. Verse 3 of Psalm 1 says, they are like trees planted along the riverbank. So the verse highlights where this tree is planted at, right? It doesn't say they're like well-rooted trees, and it doesn't say they're like trees planted in the desert. Sorry, I have a little bit of a cold, you guys. But it says they're like trees planted along the riverbank. So what I want to ask you as far as having an intentionally planted faith is, where are you planted and what are you absorbing? Where are you planted and what are you absorbing? So when you plant a seed for a tree or a plant or some cute little lavender, whatever it may be, that seed, when you plant it, actually bursts open. And roots begin to grow across and they begin to grow down. So the reason that happens is most of the nutrients are actually concentrated in that top layer of soil. So they're growing across to absorb nutrients. So if they're growing across, why are they growing down? What a great question. I'd love to tell you. They're growing down for stability. They're growing down for structural integrity so that as they grow larger and wider, they don't fall. This is about your community. Who are you planted alongside? Because the biggest trees that we see, right, we think of those in the context of a forest. If you were to go outside and just run around our campus, you wouldn't see that our biggest trees are by themselves. Our biggest trees are in this wooded area over here. They're not the little ones that are planted over here. The ones that are planted over here by themselves are small. They don't grow very well because they're little. But the ones in the forest, they're cute. Leave me alone. Oh, my gosh. But the ones that grow the largest and the strongest are planted together. Their roots are growing across. If you've run around in a forest before, you've seen that sometimes these roots actually grow over the top of each other, and they're really easy to trip over. They're all absorbing the same nutrients and growing in the same direction. You see where I'm going with this? This is about your community. Are you all absorbing the same nutrients? The people who are closest to you, are you growing toward Jesus together? Are you growing toward the sun like a tree? Or are the people closest to you growing in different directions? So where are you planted and what are you absorbing? Let me ask you something. Are you planted in a place where there is something worth absorbing? Or are you planted in a place where there isn't anything worth absorbing at all? These trees grow across to absorb the nutrients that they need. And trees just do that because that's what they do. That's just what they do. But we have to think about what we absorb. And you absorb things through your habits. Now, whether you know it or not, we all have habits. We all have things that we do. And through the things that we just normally do day after day without thinking about it, or whether we're thinking about it a lot and being intentional, we are absorbing nutrients through our habits. Do you have a habit of getting up in the morning and checking your phone and scrolling through social media before you go to school? Or do you have a habit of spending time with the Lord before you go anywhere? Do you have a habit of watching pornography when you get in your bed at night and that's the first thing you do before you go to sleep? Or do you have a habit of reading your Bible and praying to Jesus about what your day was like? Do you have a habit of sharing the gospel with your friends at school and of doing Bible studies in the gym before you go anywhere in the morning? Or do you have a habit of sitting by yourself with your AirPods in trying to block everybody out because you don't actually like them? What are you absorbing through your habits? And are you planted in a place where there's something worth absorbing? Because you are what you eat applies to you spiritually too. Garbage in, garbage out. And you are not garbage. Thanks. The second thing that I learned is that a rooted faith is intentionally postured. But postured to do what? The second line of verse 3 says, bearing fruit each season. What are you producing? If we're supposed to be bearing fruit each season, what are we actually bearing? What are you producing? I was in the garden with Beth one day, and I was running around barefooted because I had learned a lesson about wearing my nice shoes to the garden, and that lesson was don't. So I was running around barefooted in the garden, and I looked at her and I said, Beth, I didn't count on Pastor Brandon being here, so I'm sorry. But I said, Beth, if a bug crawls across my foot, I'm just telling you I'm going to cuss. Because I don't want to. It's not a good thing. That's not something I'm trying to do. But I'm just telling you I know myself and it's going to happen. And she said, okay. So 5 minutes later, a bug crawls across my foot. And I'm just confessing to you guys, don't do this. This is not a good thing. But I did cuss. And I told Beth I was sorry. I told Jesus I was sorry. And Beth just laughed at me. And she said, Diana, you know you're in a garden, right? When you were in a garden stuff happens. When you've planted tomatoes, you are going to harvest tomatoes. When you plant green beans, you will harvest green beans. Many, many, many green beans. When you plant faith, you will bear the fruit of the Spirit. And if you are not harvesting what you want to see in your life, I need you to know that it's because you haven't planted what you should have been planting to harvest that in the first place. And I'm not roasting you. Please don't think that anybody is out to attack you, because I'm not. But it's something you need to know before you turn 20 and 30, because it's a lot easier to change it now than it will be later. The fruit of the Spirit is not a checklist. It is a report card. And if you don't believe me, go home and try your best on your own power not to get ticked and say something rude to your younger sibling because they've destroyed your room. If you think the fruit of the Spirit is a checklist, go home and try to speak kindly and lovingly to your parents when they've told you to do something you don't want to do. If you think that patience is something you can work on, go to school tomorrow and try to be nice to that teacher who nobody likes. Or let me do you one better. Try to show patience to the person who is being ugly to you every day at school. The fruit of the Spirit is not a checklist. It is a report card. It shows you what you have already been planting. And what you've been planting, what you've been absorbing through your habits, like we just talked about, that is what will produce the fruit of the Spirit. Because it's not that you're going, okay, God, I've read my Bible, God, I've prayed today, God, I've spent time with you today, so I'm going to be better. When you do those things, you are giving the Holy Spirit more of you to work with. And the Spirit will take care of all of that. But you can't do it by yourself. That's why it's not called the fruit of Diana. It's not called the fruit of Courtney. It is not called the fruit of Mike. It's called the fruit of the Spirit, because the Spirit is the one producing it. It's not us. That's why we can't just work on those things. They're a result of what we've planted. So not only what are you producing, but what's happening to it? What's happening to it? I can tell you from experience that there have been some times when I've neglected going to the garden because it's just overwhelming sometimes. So I'll go and I'll see a tomato that is ripe and ready to be harvested, and I think, oh, I'll just get that in a few days. And I come back in a few days and it's rotted, and I can't harvest it anymore. We'll come back to that in just a minute, but the fruit of the Spirit could be rotting on the vine in your life. And here's what I mean by that. Are you around people who desperately need the fruit of the Spirit? Because we do all need that, right? But think about this with me. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Most of those things are not for us because the fruit of the seeds that you're planting isn't even for you. This fruit is not for you to eat because trees don't eat their own fruit. Other people do. So we all need to eat the fruit of the Spirit. We do all need those things. But I need to eat dinner tonight, and somebody who lives in Portland without a home needs to eat dinner tonight too. But that person is a whole lot hungrier than I am, and they need to eat worse than I need to eat. It's not going to hurt me. It's going to hurt them a whole lot more. Everybody needs to be loved, but people who are accustomed to being spoken to in ways that are hateful and ugly, and they're told that they don't matter, they need love and kindness and patience a whole lot worse than we do, because we're all worthy of that, but we don't all need it the same. Are you around people who need the fruit of the Spirit desperately? No, don't hear what I'm not saying. The people who influence you and who you are around the most, yes, those should be Jesus followers. But you need to intentionally put yourself in situations where you will encounter people who are in desperate need of Jesus and of the gospel. Because if you are not sharing the fruit of the Spirit with them, the fruit of your life is rotting on the vine. So let's keep reading. The last thing that I learned that I want to share with you is that a rooted faith is intentionally pruned. A rooted faith is intentionally pruned. And the last part of verse 3 says, their leaves never wither, and they prosper in all they do. And while I write that down, I'm going to get a drink of water. Just pretend I'm talking and saying something good. Yeah, thank you. So I want to ask you, what feeds on you? What feeds on you? And here's what I mean by that. There was one day when we were all at the garden together, and it was actually a lot of fun that day. It always is, but we were harvesting cabbage. And I know that doesn't sound exciting to you guys because I'm just aging prematurely. Ignore that. I'm like 90 inside. But we were harvesting cabbage, and it was super fun. Not because I was doing it, but actually because I tricked Ava into doing most of the work, so I love you. I really should have paid you for that, but I didn't. But Ava was actually the one with the knife. It was great. But I was sitting there, and there were so many cabbages that we couldn't actually harvest because bugs were eating through the leaves. It was nasty. They were like these little round bugs, and it was terrifying because you could see the little holes they left. It was gross. But is the bug wrong for eating what's there? No, that's just how life works. Is the cabbage wrong for being planted where it is where bugs can get to it? No, it was put there on purpose. You will naturally come across people in your life that pour into you and invest in you and love you and make you laugh and fill you with joy, and you feel more full of the Spirit after you're with them, and keep those people close to you. But you will also come across people who are in desperate need of the Spirit. They desperately need the gospel, and sometimes when they leave, when they've come over to your house and eaten dinner and they're gone, you feel a little bit emptier than you were when they got there. And that's natural. Don't kick those people out because they need to be fed by something. But there are people who feed you and people who feed on you. This is about knowing whether or not the balance is right. Because if the balance is off in either direction, the leaves of your life will start to wither. If you are being poured into but you're not pouring out, there's more nutrients than you can absorb, and that will actually cause the leaves to rot. There will be withering leaves in your life. But if you are pouring out more than you're getting poured into, that will cause your leaves to rot too. So what feeds on you? And what's crowding your roots? What's crowding your roots? And here's what I mean by that. If you go to the store like Lowe's or Tractor Supply or something and you buy a plant, it is really likely that when you take it out of that weird plastic thing that I don't understand, the roots are going to be wrapped around and around and around the soil. And that is because they've run out of room in the pot that they're in, and they need more nutrients. They're ready for that. They're still healthy. They just ran out of space. The plant is mature. It just needs more room. When you are spiritually root bound, when your roots are crowded, they've run into something, they've run into a wall in your life, and they can't grow anymore. They're standing in the way of your growth. And so as you put down deeper roots, as you put down wider roots spiritually, you are eventually going to run into something you need to uproot to make room. These are weeds in your life. These could be anything. They could be distractions. For me, a lot of times it's television. That's why I try to limit my TV exposure. A lot of times it's your phone. Sometimes it's habitual sin. What's that sin that you fall into over and over and over again? And there's no shame in that. Don't feel ashamed that you're in that situation because it's happened to all of us. And if it hasn't happened to you yet, it will, so pay attention. But what's that sin that you struggle with more than the others? Sometimes it's lust. Sometimes it's pride. No matter what that is for you, your roots will hit a wall and say, oh, I can't grow anymore because I've run into this. Maybe it's a relationship that doesn't need to be part of your life anymore, that's influencing you more than it should be, and it's not influencing you for Jesus. Your roots will run into that and say, oh, I can't grow anymore. I'm done until you uproot this. What is it that's getting you spiritually root-bound? So, guys, the question we set out to answer tonight is, what does it mean to have a rooted faith? And we learned that a rooted faith is intentionally planted, intentionally postured, and intentionally pruned. So I'm going to give you some ways that you can apply this to your life tonight, tomorrow. Like, I want you to do it right now, because sometimes we fall into the trap of, oh, I'll do it later. No, you won't. And I know, because I won't. I'll wash the dishes later. No, I won't. I've met me. No thanks. But apply it now. So a rooted faith is intentionally planted. I want to encourage you to commit to a Sabbath, because this will plant you in a place where you're nourished and where you're with the right people. So a Sabbath is one day out of your week. It's designed to be a day, but if you don't have a day, half a day. If you don't have half a day, whatever you do have, just something consistent that you can give, that you can do. Commit to a Sabbath. And a Sabbath is this rhythm of stop, rest, worship, and delight. If you're taking notes, it's okay to write that down. I didn't put it on the screen. That's my bad. But stop, rest, worship, and delight. So stop means stop working. Intentionally set your week up where on this day or this half day or whatever you have, don't do any schoolwork. Try to set it up where you don't have to do any housework. No work. Just stop. And then rest. I love y'all so much, but I can't tell you how many times I've heard, I'm tired, when I ask you how you're doing. Go to bed. That'll fix that. You're laughing, but I'm not kidding. I slept a lot last night. It was great. But rest. Do something restful. Go to sleep, please. Worship. It's important to me that you understand this is not a Sabbath from God. It is a Sabbath to God. You are doing this with God. It is not a break from God. It is a break with God. So don't neglect worship. And this is reading scripture. This is prayer. This is spending time just in silence with Jesus. Anything that you do that helps you, like that sows into you spiritually, that's worship. Worship is worthship. It is your way of ascribing worth to God. So anything that is worshipful, do that. And then delight. What's fun to you? What brings you joy? What makes you happy? And this is not the do whatever makes you happy thing that you see on Instagram. This is not that. But do what gives you joy. They're very different things. This is intended to be done in community. And this is supposed to help you grow in the same direction as your community and toward each other. My second challenge to you is about a rooted faith is intentionally postured. Commit to sharing Jesus with a friend. And I know that sounds scary to some of you. If you're an introvert like me, and believe it or not, that's my personality, commit to sharing Jesus with a friend. And that doesn't have to be going up to somebody you've never met and saying, hey, can I share the gospel with you? Because that can work. I don't know if it works all the time, but it can. But I think your life is a better witness than just your one-time interaction. And this is about sharing the fruit of the Spirit with someone you know and love who desperately needs Jesus. Maybe it's a sibling. This is challenging. Maybe it's a parent. Maybe it's your friend, somebody at school. But commit to sharing Jesus with them. And maybe for you, that is sharing the gospel story from Scripture. But maybe it's just showing them the fruit of the Spirit in your life. Maybe it's being kind to them and gentle with them when you know that somebody else isn't being gentle with them. Maybe it's loving them well when you know they're not being loved well at home. It can be any of those things, but share Jesus with them. Share the gospel, because I'm telling you, if you live with the fruit of the Spirit evident in your life and you share that with someone who desperately needs it, they will eventually ask you about the gospel. You won't have to bring it up. They will ask you what's different about you. And my last challenge is this: a rooted faith is intentionally pruned. So, what can you commit to leaving behind so your roots can grow deeper? And we just talked about this a second ago. This could be a habit that you have, a habit of being on your phone too much, a habit of playing too many video games. Whatever is stealing your time from Jesus is a distraction. So what is it that you need to leave behind? It could be a relationship, an environment, a distraction, a habitual sin. But I'm challenging you, pray about this, and maybe you don't need to pray about it. Maybe it's coming into your mind right now. But commit to leaving something behind so your roots can grow deeper. Y'all, I love you. I appreciate you letting me hang out with you tonight. We're going to transition into groups a little bit differently because I just gave you 3 application points, right? Some things that you can go and apply to your life. I want you to get ready to go to a group and talk about those things and say, what is it in my life? Like, which one of these points can I apply to my life tonight, tomorrow?